Could you please state your name and your date of birth?
Christina Schlesinger, I was born November 19th, 1946. I moved to Venice in 1971. I'd finished college, I'd been in Europe for a year, then I came back east and I was in Hudson Valley, and then my parents were getting divorced and I hated the East, and I realized I was a lesbian, but I didn't even know. I knew I knew there was something that was different, and I knew there was no way that I could come out back east. And my father was well known at the time. He had worked in the Kennedy administration, and I had this very interesting, rich background with growing up in Cambridge and everybody in my family being involved with Harvard and academics and politics. But anyway, I just had to run. So my roommate at Radcliffe lived in Westwood. And I came out to California. I first went up to San Francisco thinking that LA was like the armpit of the nation. You don't end up in LA, you go to San Francisco, So I ended up going down to Vivi Peter in Westwood. And she was my age, we were both in our early 20s. She was living with this guy, Ted, who she later married, a psychiatrist. And so I was living with them for a while, just thinking it was gonna be for the summer. The rains came, I moved to Santa Monica. From Santa Monica, I eventually moved to Venice, and there was a guy named Joe Funk. Joe Funk had this it was on Rose, and it was like this big kind of yard and this big building that was kind of like a barn, and you'd walk in and there'd be like art here and artists there, and he had a printing, because he did lithography, we did some etchings together, but so that was where and he taught pottery. I think I learned ceramics there. I don't know what it was. It was just this kind of free-for-all place where you could just go and hang out and meet people. And that's where I met this woman, Susie. And Susie lived on Grand. That was where my first studio was in the living room of her house on Grand Avenue. And she was an artist, and she was working at UCLA. She was modeling for Richard Diebencourt. He was teaching at UCLA. So that was one of my first jobs. I was a nude model in Richard Diebencourt's UCLA class. I don't know, so we rented a house on Paloma Avenue for the summer. And then all these people just showing up. And I was talking with my friend Karen Rosenberg. You gotta interview her. Because Karen was saying you'd wake up in the morning and there'd be all these people in the yard and the front. You didn't know them. It was like, that was sort of what it was like. So I decided to apply for the Feminist Studio project because that sounded kind of interesting. And I thought, well, maybe I should go to school. I don't know. So I got in and I started going up to Valencia, which is a hell of a long drive in Venice. I was like, and I mean, it was kind of interesting. Miriam Shapiro, Judy Chicago, there are a lot of people that I met that stayed, but I was just there for one semester. And that's when I did the lesbian bar piece. I did that project, which I wrote about, I did as a student at Cal Arts with Judy Chicago, because she said do something personal, and I just moved to LA. And I guess by then I had just met Judy, because she and Judy and I, we just drove around LA and went to all the lesbian bars we could find, in North Hollywood. Where there were so many, there were like 30, 40, they're like none now. So, but what I met Judy was that, I guess that summer, I went to Big Brothers. I was like walked into Big Brothers, and there was this guy named Curtis, who was this black guy who was the bartender, occasionally bartender. He liked to be bartender. He wasn't really a bartender. He was actually an aide. Just Pat Russell. Her name was Pat Russell. She was the councilwoman. You know how LA is divided up into 13 councilmanic districts. She was the councilwoman from our district. Curtis was her aide. Curtis used to hang out at those lesbian bars just for fun. So Judy and he became friends. Anyway, so we all became friends, but Judy came into Big Brothers looking for mural painters. Wanted to do a history of Venice murals on the Venice Pavilion walls, which are all long gone. And so she came into the bar looking for mural painters, among other things. And there I was. I said, oh yeah, I'd like to paint a mural. And that's how we met. And so then later on, I had all these stupid jobs. I was working in a factory in Culver City, flocking wallpaper. I had a lot of dumb jobs. I had the job in UCLA. But Judy said, you really need a job. And here's the other thing that's interesting about Judy. I came from like Cambridge. My father was a professor, worked in the White House. Her father, she came from like Pacoima, like the illegitimate daughter, then the stepdaughter of this, this whole totally different thing. We came from completely different worlds, and we just everything we kind of needed from each other and wanted, enjoyed about it, learned about it. It was just this fabulous connection of like two different worlds. And that's out of that came like SPARC, a citywide mural project and all this stuff.
You mentioned SPARC. Can you talk about your involvement?
Okay, well we got to get there.
Oh,
That's a long ways away. First of all, we created the citywide mural project. Again, pitching this idea of using recreation parks buildings which were covered with graffiti, to use those as places for murals. So we sat down at Judy's kitchen table on Rialto, and we sketched out this citywide mural project where we would put 2 murals in every council managed district, and they would be community murals that would be either at recreation and parks or senior centers or whatever. And we took it to Pat Russell, who our friend from Curtis, the bartender at Big Brothers, and she loved it, and she pitched it, and it got passed. So once the citywide mural project was created, I got a job. Well, part of the thing was that I became the assistant, that Judy was already working for the department. I got this job at the Rec and Parks Department. So then we had to we had to go to every single council managed district, identify artists, identify walls. Here's the thing about Judy. Judy Bachner is a total visionary, because she gets these ideas. She said, let's do this, let's spin off the citywide mural project and create our own mural organization. But let's think of a name. So we're sitting around the table thinking of names, and so I'm thinking about the Weatherman. And that quote, they say, it only takes a spark to start a revolution. That's where we got the name SPARC. So we look at SPARC, we thought, so that's what we took the K off and made it C, Social Public Art Resource Center. So it came straight from the Weatherman. So we did the History of Venice murals, and that was a wonderful thing, because there were probably 13 or 14 artists who worked on that. They were in the Venice Pavilion at the end of Windward, which used to have that recreation, I don't know what they have there now, but there was a recreation center, and it had this concrete walls all around it, and they were always getting marked up with graffiti. And then also because the walls were high, you could peek, there were gang fights and stuff like that inside. So they wanted, Judy was working for the Department of Recreation and Parks. And so she proposed the idea, instead of having community artists paint murals of the history of Venice in the inside of the Venice Pavilion. I signed up, and then that's where I met Catherine. I met, Ulysses Jenkins, who's a very well-known video artist now. That's where I met him. He started there. Art Mortimer. There were just Galen Vaughn. There were all these different people that we all showed up to paint the murals. Nobody was paid anything. So Tribeca, I'm living in Tribeca, and I loft on 1 Hudson Street, and there was a gallery right across the street. And I used to look in the gallery and see this guy. He was working, and I was painting it. That's how I met Rick Barnett. Rick Barnett and I became very good friends. And at some point, he moved to LA, and he's with his boyfriend Eric Gordon, who's still in LA, and started working for the Jan Baum Gallery. And this was like in the early 90s. And they used to live right behind, on Speedway, right behind the Israel Evans Center, which has now the Bar Center, whatever, right behind it. And Eric Gordon started working for SPARC. And Rick was working downtown for Jan Baum Gallery. And they lived right near that wall. And Eric would look at it, and Rick would look at it and say, hey, this is a great site for a mural. Maybe we can get Chrissy, that's my nickname, out here, to paint a mural. So since Eric was working for SPARC already, he went over to the Israel Evans Center and said, do you want a mural? We can do a SPARC March mural, and so, they had to pay for it, but I mean, in those days, I wasn't paid very much for the original mural. So they said, yeah, it's a great idea. So it was actually Eric who suggested, why don't you put Chagall characters on the boardwalk? Because it's a Jewish center, a Jewish painter, blah, blah, blah. And so they loved it. They liked it. So then I came out to Venice the summer of '91, and I spent that whole summer there living in Eric and Rick's apartment right behind on the Speedway right there, sleeping on this little kind of alcove shelf, frankly, getting up dawn every morning. And then my crew was I had about 4 or 5 people that were like some UCLA students and different people. And the wall was a whole block long and went around the front too. So we get out there, and the wall was in really actually awful condition. It was really rough, and we had to, we'd get up. Get up every morning. We had to unlock the scaffolding, put the scaffolding up. I was so day after day, and the surface was kind of crummy and crumbling, but whatever. So we gridded the wall, we transferred the drawing, we started painting. And as we started painting, people started coming up. And for example, this girl, Sybil Grinnell, came up and said, oh, she was Britain. Oh, I'd love to paint murals. I said, well, you know, I'd come back. And so I gathered, my crew grew as the summer went on. Sybil turned out to be a fantastic painter, worked on my next two murals with me, became a mural painter in England. There was this homeless guy who'd added all the angels, and he, Bill, and he used to come, he came by one day and he had this drawing, it was this big, of this angel, because these angels were all like real to him. You know, they were all like real people, real characters in his imagination, whatever. We created a space for him, we gridded, and he stood up on there on the ladder and he painted his angels, and all the angels he painted himself. He was terrific. He added great stuff to the mural. Sybil came along, and then some of the, on the front of the mural, in the original mural, there was the, there used to be a synagogue on the boardwalk, and so this woman from the center came out and said, you know, there was a synagogue and you should, my parents went there all the time. I said, well, that's great. I said, why don't you put that in there? And so she did. And then later, the second time around, she was still alive. And then the last time I went there, she had Alzheimer's, but her daughter was there, and she told me how much it had meant for her mother to be involved in that. And then the second time, and it was like people loved it. You know, all the seniors were so involved in the mural. It took us 3 months to finish the mural, and there was a wonderful dedication ceremony, and they gave me this little plaque, and which I still have, and it was great. It was so intimate, you know, because I sometimes would have, it was a small, there weren't that many elderly but it was a real community. It was a quieter time. It wasn't as crowded. It wasn't as expensive to live. We're talking about Venice. The question was about Venice and how it's changed. It's changed in radical ways. And for example, Oakwood. When I was living in Venice in my 20s and 30s, it was like, I would walk through Oakwood to get to Venice, to get to SPARC when I was doing the digital mural. First of all, they said, you walked? I said, yeah, exactly. It's not that far. But it was like, Oakwood is such a so it's totally gentrified. I mean, it's like everybody has nice gardens, and it's a completely different neighborhood than it was. The canals, like you saw the pictures of the canals. It was like dirt lots. You know, rent was $90 a month, and I lived on 2409 Ocean Avenue. But there was this whole stretch. I think it was either Howland or Linney that was just like little shack after little shack, and all the shacks were like lesbians or musicians and filmmakers, and you just kind of walked down the street and, you know, smelled dope, heard music. You know, it was like this. It was kind of like a little wonderland. I mean, I couldn't have chosen a better place to come out as a lesbian in 1971 than Venice, California at that time, because it was so supportive, and it was so, you know, it was a real community. I guess maybe it was small enough in scale that it was a real community in terms of women, in terms of artists. There was like the piano man, he had a piano on wheels that rolled up. A lot of that is in that original mural that Judy and I did of Venice in the 60s and 70s, because we were capturing what was going on, you know, the yoga classes, everything was just on a smaller, more innocent scale, I guess. I guess that's the main thing. Muscle Beach, it was all there, but it was just tinier. It was a very important time in my life. And I made lasting friends. I mean, to this, you know, my dearest friends in California are all the friends I made in Venice when I was in my 20s and 30s. And we've all stayed in touch all that time, and everybody and I think there was an energy about Venice that drew people, like I said when we started off, about the backstories of the people that's a book in itself. What drew all of us to Venice at that time, except that there was this very positive, there was this feeling you could be yourself. That nobody knew I'd gone anything about my family or Cambridge or Harvard. Who cares? I mean, that was like nothing. It was like who you were at the moment, you know, like who you were and what you wanted to do, and you wanted to paint, you wanted to make videos, you wanted to make music. I mean, there were dark sides to it too, but in general, I just feel like it was a time of innocence and generosity that was very, and a sense of community that was very lovely. It was very wonderful to be part of.